All right, it is 6:30, so I will call to order a meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. It is Monday, June 27th, 2022. We are in the OSD Innovation Center at Oregon High School. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak? Here. Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Mr. Lebrun? Mr. Pankratz?
Present.
Ms. Wright? Ms. Flanagan?
Present. The board does have a quorum, and I do have from Ms. Heitz that this meeting has been duly noticed, so we are good there if anyone wants to see that. Next up is approval of the agenda. Tonight we do have our consent calendar items. We do have our normal information items. Then we do have an action item, which is policy 411. We'll have some committee reports. We will have another important school finance update, and then our normal information items to end the meeting. And then the board will go into closed session. And we will not return to open session after we do that. So I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda. All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Next on the agenda is our consent calendar. Board should have received the staff resignations and assignments so they can review those, and then I will read the following donations. We have a $5,000 donation from the Oregon PTO, and it's a donation to the Prairie View Building Fund, a $500 donation from the ExxonMobil Educational Alliance for Brooklyn Elementary, a $122.12 donation for bus transportation to the Oregon Choral Boosters, and a $100 donation to the A-Team Scholarship from Brad Ashmore. So once again, we do thank those individuals and organizations for their donations to the Oregon School District. All right, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar. All right, is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Moving on to B, information items. Do we have anyone registered for public comment? Okay, is there anyone here for public comment? Seeing that no one is here, we will move on to number 2, OEA report. Is anyone here from the OEA to make a statement? Okay, seeing that they're not. And then our students are on summer break. So we will move on to C, action items, policy 411. So what we're going to do tonight is Dr. Bergstrom is going to make a little bit of a presentation, and then we will kick that to Heather as chair of policy so she can make the recommendation from policy. So Dr. Bergstrom, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everybody. So as we discuss something that is as important as a portrait of graduate, I think it's also just as critical to talk about the process that we used to get the product that you will be discussing tonight. Because we had a considerable amount of community impact, or excuse me, community input, as well as input from student leadership or school leadership teams, the administrative team, students and the Superintendent's Advisory Council. The community input sessions go all the way back to last summer, if you remember correctly. And then after we collected a significant amount of input last summer, we used that to craft the product that school leadership teams and the administrative team reacted to. All the while, this work was guided by the Visioning Committee. We collected additional community feedback in March when we had our community information night related to planning for the future. So there have been, thankfully, multiple times for people to be able to tell us what they're thinking about our collective vision for an OSD graduate. So the process has been considerably thoughtful, I would say, because we've taken a lot of time, collected a lot of input, and we have a product that I think really encapsulates what it is we want for our students. So after it went through the Visioning Committee and all of that input was synthesized into a product that is sort of the reimagining of the 4 C's, that's when that final product or near final product was sent to the Policy Committee, because Portrait of a Graduate is really referring to Policy 41102, which is a part of the larger graduation policy of 411. And you'll note that there is going to be a new graphic coming, that Erica is working on that, and we have some really great possibilities. This is our stand-in graphic, just so you know. And it'll be with us until we get the new one. But now I think it's probably time to turn it over to Ms. Garrison as the head of the Policy Committee.
Gina, are you going to walk us through the changes? That would be great.
Okay, great. So everyone should have policy 411 in their packet. So the language in purple is what the policy committee is proposing for the board to approve tonight. It was approved at policy committee, and essentially it's just taking the work that visioning had done and putting into language that matches the format of the policies that we have. And then once we have a graphic, then we would add that to the appendix as well. So if you look at the preamble, I would say that was really important to the committee for people to understand how the rationale behind the portrait of a graduate and why it's important, and explaining that. So that preamble is taken right from vision. The one change there is instead of, in the second sentence, instead of "we will endeavor," it says "the district will endeavor," but otherwise it's the same. And that's just to comport with the way our policies are otherwise written. And then in 41101, the committee felt that competency should really be first, and talking about the credits that are required for students who are graduating. And there also will be work. The administrative team right now is working on some of the credit requirements to align to the portrait of a graduate. And so you will see that coming back to policy committee after that work is completed. So 41101 outlines the competency standards that students will exhibit mastery in. And then 41102 talks about really the vision for students graduating after June of 2022. And so you'll see their competency is restated, and then it talks about character and culture, and then critical and creative thinking, and then community, and just outlining the work of the vision committee. So, Ms. Garrison, what, if anything, would you add to that from our discussion at policy?
I think you covered everything. We were really excited to have it reflect the work that the visioning committee and all of the community input and that admin and leadership and staff and students have put in. And so there was not a lot to change other than to marry that up, but it's the policy committee's recommendation that we put this forward to the board.
And then did you also want to add that that recommendation also includes that policy 411 will come back to policy committee once you receive the information from the administrative team in terms of an update for 411. So I think it's important we include that in the motion.
Yep, so that motion would have a part B to it.
Okay. All right. So it is a committee recommendation, so we do not need a second. So I will open the floor for any discussion. Go ahead, Mary. Turn on your mic, please.
Just one point of clarification. Will the schematic be added just as an appendix, and we won't need to? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the question was, will the schematic need approval? It will not. Any other questions? Go ahead, Anna.
A quick comment. And it's in actually the 41101, the first purple sentence, and this is very, very nitpicky, but the first sentence says that the graduate will exhibit mastery of all assigned and self-selected learning standards. And the only question I have related to that is if it's an elective class that's not required to be met by the outline of classes, I just wouldn't want that to be an issue if somebody didn't pass that class. Not that they would, because if you're self-selecting it, you're probably going to do well in it because you are excited about it. I just point that out, that the first statement does sort of reflect that they'll exhibit mastery of all self-selected learning standards, which may not be the case, and they still could graduate even if they did not complete the course or pass it. So I just bring that up. It's, like I said, very, very nitpicky, but open to thoughts on that.
Dr. Bergstrom, would you like to address that, or Gina?
Sure. Apologize. I believe it's the second sentence that is meant to really address what you stated, Ms. Bijak. Students must meet all learning requirements as outlined below, and then it is the fact that there are only a certain number of elective credits that are necessary for graduation. So I'm glad you pointed that out because nobody has ever in this long-standing policy. But the second sentence, I believe, covers us related to clarity about what is required for graduation.
I did like the addition of the word because there are classes people can choose. I just didn't want that to get caught up in a misinterpretation of any kind, and I think hopefully, probably it doesn't, so I guess I'm fine leaving it. I just wanted to bring that up.
All right, any additional discussion? Go ahead, Troy.
Just one question, and my apologies. I don't think I was at the latest policy meeting where this was discussed, but on the bottom of 41102, there's a sentence that was struck, that students in special education programs can graduate based upon completion of the goals specified in their IEPs. Could I just get some background on why that was struck?
If you look at what was struck in the first part of 41101, it was really about students, a requirement that they display competencies in all of 41102 via their portfolio. So this bottom sentence, that would be connected to that if students had an individual education plan, they could graduate via that as opposed to the portfolio. So considering the fact that we weren't requiring a portfolio, we struck the sentence that was connected to that requirement.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Garrison? Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Wright? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Thanks to the Visioning Committee and the Policy Committee and administration for all the work on Portrait of a Graduate. So we are ready to roll with that. Okay, moving on to D, discussion items, committee reports. I will go back to Heather for policy.
Our next meeting is before the board meeting on July 11th, and we'll be continuing our work on the employee handbook.
Great, thank you. All right, vision steering, Troy.
We met last Wednesday. We had 3 agenda items. We continued our work with the recreational facilities study. We had our first look as a committee at the Worth Woods Master Plan, and we discussed school finances, which we're going to discuss later in this meeting. And then for future meetings, we do have a meeting scheduled next week, July 12th. I think that's Tuesday. So that's it.
All right, great, thank you. Next on the discussion items is 2, school finances, future planning. We've had this as a continued agenda item, and so now we're really getting into the meat of it in terms of what our challenges are, what the board needs to look at in the future, and how we're engaging the community. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you. I think it's really important for us to continue to talk about why this keeps coming up in our agendas. I think this is the 4th meeting in a row that this has been part of our agenda. And that's because the situation across the state of Wisconsin is very serious related to school financing and how people are moving forward as school districts throughout the state. So this is not an Oregon thing. This is not a Dane County thing. This is a state of Wisconsin concern. So our community, our Oregon community, so I'll be specific to us for a moment. We've had a long-standing goal, right, that every one of our children will have the best educator in their classroom. We know how important that is. And our community has agreed to that on multiple occasions, that we share that belief. Now, that belief is rooted in our experiences as individuals, as people who are caregivers or family members of the students who are in school. But I'd also say that that belief is rooted in research. We know that over all the factors over which we have control, the teacher in the classroom has the greatest impact on student success. Teacher in the classroom is number 1, principal of the school is number 2. And I think that's really important for us to keep in mind as we're talking about these larger issues in Wisconsin regarding state or school funding and how they impact us here in Oregon. So there are 3 specific challenges that we'll discuss. And the first is the lack of state funding. The second is a national problem that is also showing up here, and that is teacher shortages. And both of those things combined actually lead to a lot of competition for the people who are educators. So first we'll start really high level. We're going to look only at Wisconsin. And 2002, that was back when I was I think I was a teacher at East High School back in 2002. And back then, Wisconsin was number 12 in the nation regarding per pupil spending. We were 11% above the national average. In 2020, we are now 26th in the nation related to per pupil spending. We're 6% below the national average. Now, the thing about this is that it is the largest drop in national ranking of any state in this time period. And the fact that the state has given 0 increases, 0 per pupil spending increases for 21-22 and 22-23, that's not even included in this ranking. So it's highly likely that we would drop even further the next time this ranking is configured. So if we're talking about school funding, let's talk about school budgets. And this, I'm clearly veering off into Mr. Weiland territory, and he has the opportunity to correct me at any time. But the important thing to remember, if we're just at a really high level, is that for school districts, approximately 80% of their entire operating budget is on staffing and benefits, because we are a people business. It's not about our buildings, it's not about our Chromebooks, it's about the people in the buildings and the work that they do. So that it makes sense that 80% of our budget would be contributed to that. What I think is kind of interesting is that 90% of our budget is actually determined by the state. So what that is, the biggest components of that are per pupil funding and the revenue limits. Those are the biggest components of that 90%, and it's completely controlled by the state. So you have those two issues. The biggest portion of a budget is staffing and benefits. 90% of our budget is determined by the state. And for the last 2 years in a row, we've had no additional per pupil funds. None. Now, you might think, well, is that really so bad? Well, I have a chart here that shows us why that actually is super impactful. Because if you'll see, take a look at this graph, and you see the blue line is the consumer price index, and the orange line is the percentage of change in per pupil allowable funding, what the state will allow us to fund. You'll see that CPI and the state funding are very well aligned over the last 10 years until 21-22. And then you see CPI taking a sharp increase, and you see 2 years in a row of 0. Everybody's experiencing this, right? Everybody is experiencing the impact of inflation. I think what's important to note is that we don't have the option within our operating budget to make up for the fact that that our staff is experiencing this. So let's talk about our staff for a second. Like, we've only been talking about big picture Wisconsin, big picture budgets. If we think about our Oregon staff. Now, we know that our educators have been super committed to the Oregon School District. We have an excellent retention rate. We have, Gina's got an admirable rate of people saying yes when she offers them jobs. Now, people come to us very much for our values and for our culture, and we are considered a destination district, and that's important to know. And this has contributed to the success that we've had, right? But not being able to keep up with inflation is resulting in staff having to make some very difficult decisions related to where they are employed. That's our current staff, but also people who are coming to the district when we're offering them jobs. So if you look at this chart, it really puts it in very simple terms. For 21-22, CPI was at 1.23. Our educators received a 0 increase in their base pay. Now, there was a 1.23 stipend, and that's great, but that's not about their base pay. That was about one-time money. In 22-23, the upcoming school year, CPI is 4.7. Our current finances would only allow us to do a 0% increase. Now, if we project even further, we're looking at a CPI of 6.23 to 8.04. And before you start saying, where do these numbers come from? I have a little background information on that. So these CPI numbers come from the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission. They publish the CPIU for school bargaining groups. And the typical implementation of this number lags by about 6 to 9 months, depending on the employee group. So January to December of 2021, that calculation is 4.7. And we have about 4 months of 2022, but we really won't have that number until about mid-January of 2023. And it's also important to note that for every 1% of salary and benefit is about $350,000. So if you think about the 1.23, what that would equal. So big picture in the state, the impact on the budget, the impact it's having currently on our staff, and then you take into consideration the other piece that I mentioned previously, and that is the idea that we are, as a nation, experiencing a teacher shortage. And that shortage is playing out in Wisconsin, and that's really important to note because I think some people feel that this is playing out elsewhere. It's actually playing out here too. There are more people leaving the profession and fewer people entering the profession. So that top graph comes from National Education Association, and it was a survey asking people about the impact of the pandemic, and 55% of the respondees said that it's making them consider retiring or leaving early. The bottom group is really, that's coming from the U.S. Department of Education, and actually that group, that little bar graph, or excuse me, line graph on the bottom left. What it's showing is the darker line, the blue line, that's the number of people earning teaching degrees. And it starts way back in like 1970. And you can see the drastic decrease in the number of people who are going and getting their bachelor's degree in teaching. And then the red line is the number of people getting master's degrees in education. You can see that that has experienced quite the decline too. And then overall, Education Week, just in March of 22, did an article where they said that there has been a 35% decrease in the number of people completing teacher education programs over the last decade. Now that's significant, right? Fewer people entering the profession, more people leaving the profession, zero increase from the state for 2 years in a row, which means zero increase for our staff for 2 years in a row. This is a highly competitive, it's starting to become a highly competitive market because of all of these factors and how they play together. So what's the bottom line? What's all of this, the story that we're trying to tell? The first thing is that if we wish to continue offering the highest quality education and services to our children, and I think that's something that everybody would be all in favor of, then we really need to keep and attract excellent educators in an increasingly competitive market. And we can do this by offering a competitive salary or competitive salaries that allow the best educators to continue serving OSD and to attract new people who want to be educators, attract them to the OSD. So considering all of that, what really are the important next steps? And the important next steps are the board will be spending time trying to create a path forward that makes sense for our school district and for the benefit for our educators, which is for the benefit of our students. And in order to create a path forward that really makes sense for our current situation and for our community, we need to have conversations with our community. And that will be one of the most important parts of the next couple of months.
All right, before we go to questions, I just have a couple things. Number one, thank you for putting together that presentation. I think it's really succinct and it really gets to the heart of why we're in the situation that we are and what we're kind of held to as a public school district in the state of Wisconsin. We can't control our destiny all the time, and so, which moves to board work. And so just to let the board know, we will be having an action item on the agenda in July to direct staff in terms of future financial planning and some investigation into what are our options, and there aren't a lot. We are not an organization that can continue to produce more things to make more revenue. We have very limited options. So That's also why we're engaging in community conversations, because it's time. So I will open the floor to questions about the presentation. Go ahead, Leslie.
So just, I want to be clear, and this is like a trying to understand thing. Can you go back to the CPI for last year, this year, or this next year, and not this one, the other one? Oh, wrong way. There you go, right there. Okay, so in there we're showing in the last year and then this coming year, we're unable to give any current base pay increases to our teachers. Were we able to give base pay increases the prior year in 2020-21 as a whole? And if so, do we have an idea about what that kind of percentage looked like, if that even met cost of living or anything? It was just at the cost of living. So our teachers, what you're telling me, for the last year and then this coming year would be living off of cost of living 2 years ago when inflation has increased a huge amount. And then I don't remember the numbers. I know we looked at this a couple months back, but when we had to vote on our benefits package, there was a significant increase to our teachers this year. I don't remember the numbers on that.
We ended up with a 4.5% increase in our health insurance. We would have had over 6% or around 6%, I believe, had we not changed insurance providers.
So we did the best we could as far as that could go at this point in time, but that it's still an added amount that we're saddling on our educators at this point.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, additional questions? Mary, go ahead.
Thank you. So, do we know what type of referenda the neighboring communities are doing, whether they're the operational versus the debt, or whether they're like restructuring their pots of money, or et cetera?
I think for the most part it's operational. The operational is the only one that's going to fix this issue for folks. There are some that are doing capital, but that was already kind of in the mix before this situation happened. So there is going to be a combination of them, but the issue that we're talking about, really the operational is the only one that's going to help that.
And do we know whether they're permanent operational or temporary operational?
I think most are recurring.
I think so.
No, I'm sorry.
What we have to remember, though, is that even the districts that are further along in the consideration of a referendum, many of their boards have not yet voted on a referendum question, so we certainly can't say that it's a for sure, because their boards still need to vote on this also. However, it is not just throughout the county, but really throughout the state. There aren't very many pathways forward.
And then, so Andy, I know you mentioned, I think it was the last meeting, where if there's an increase in property taxes, then state aid may go down, and there was some conversation of that in the packet, but it's not necessarily the case. Do we know whether that would be true for Oregon School District, and is the difference proportional?
A lot of stuff there.
I know.
It is true that as a district, any district becomes more property wealthy, so more property behind a student on average, then you lose state aid. Okay, so as you become more wealthy, you have the ability to tax your local property taxpayers more, then you lose state aid because the revenue limit controls your spending. Okay, so I gave the analogy last time of we're a two-income family. Both spouses work for the same employer, and as one of the spouses gets a raise, the other one gets a deduction. That's how it kind of works. I'll probably keep it simple at that point in time. As you start adding variables, then it gets a little bit more complicated, like how much more money the state would put into the state aid formula, what's going on from spending from all 420 school districts. All those different variables can impact what the amount of state aid you get. But again, it doesn't change the amount of spending authority that you have. That is the same. But basically, it's a some certain amount or some I forget the term that the legislature uses, but based on how much money they put into the state aid formula, that gets distributed over 420 districts based on their spending from the prior year. So all that data has to be collected. It'll be starting to be collected on Friday, because it's the first day of the next fiscal year, and then certified by auditors, and then it all goes into an equation, and then that determines what kind of happens from a tax perspective. But overall, the legislature knew that if they put more money into the state aid formula, it would decrease taxes in most school districts, because they didn't change the amount of money that they could spend, the more revenue that they could bring in. All they're doing is kind of balancing things out. That was more information than you wanted.
No, actually, so where I'm trying to get to is understanding, let's say we do bring in more, property tax through a referendum. What's the likelihood that we would be at a net zero increase because of a decrease in state aid?
Because of an increase in state aid, it really depends on how much money we ask for in the referendum. I can do estimates based on estimates that we actually purchased a forecasting model this year, which we haven't done in the past, because I knew that question will eventually be asked. And so once I know the number, then I can kind of calculate that out and say, this is what the forecast model says we would be able to do. The types of numbers we're talking about here, there probably would be an impact, depending on where we land. But I can't tell you what that impact is until you tell me the number. And
I think that's what we're talking about for the next board meeting for action item, is really directing Andy and Dr. Bergstrom and that staff to start doing some of those calculations for us, because if we do choose to go down the route of a referendum, the board has to vote on that by the end of August. And so that's what we're talking about at the next board meeting in terms of action that this board would direct staff to do, in terms of start doing some of those calculations. So good questions, Mary. Okay. Anything else, Troy?
Yeah, I guess really good presentation. Really helpful to follow along that way. I guess one thing that kind of stands out to me, though, is that, we're at a point in education where our teachers have a lot of demands on them. They have a lot of pressures. Our students have a lot of needs. We've talked about social, emotional, and mental health needs, and we've done some things to help try to address those needs. And so some of our community may question, well, why can't you make some cuts, right? And when you look at, as you said, 80% of our budget is on our teachers. Making cuts reduces staff, which then only puts more and more pressure on the staff that we have, and just, in my opinion, becomes a downward spiral. So I'm glad we're talking about this. I'm glad we're proactively looking to address this, because I just don't see putting more demands on our staff at this time in education as a good decision for us to make. So that's all I wanted to say.
I think that's a really good point, Troy. And I think to that point, what I would add too is we've also done some cost-cutting measures. We've restructured some debt. We've changed our health insurance company so that we know that we have a longer-term dedicated what we know we're going to spend on health insurance, but that also saved us money, but it made us change our health insurance. So we've done things as a board and an administration to already make some of those tough decisions, but we don't have a lot more tough decisions that we're able to make if we don't start impacting our kids' education. So I completely agree with you on that. Go ahead, Heather.
Mary asked some of the questions that I wanted to ask, but I also wanted to piggyback on what Troy said is, right now we're talking about this very straightforward salary piece. And while salary is certainly important, I think about what other things can be done to support teachers, right? And so I know we had a substitute shortage, or a hard time getting subs. So I think there are other things that also cost money that, and I know we have not directed anybody to do any sort of formal activity yet, but I think about salary certainly being important, but also, and not or, what else is there that is going to not only keep the best educator in every room, but also continue to make us a destination. And obviously that has a dollar amount tied to it. So just wanted to throw that out there.
And I think, one of the important things too is we say teachers, but when we talk about educators in this district and say staff, we are talking about that everyone that has an impact on our kids, from bus drivers and paras and subs and teachers and administration and coaches, anyone that touches our district and touches our kids. So that's a really good point too, Heather. I really appreciate you making that the arms are wide when we talk about educators. And those are things that, you're right, we need to consider as we look to fund what makes this district go. So, anyone else? Go ahead, Leslie.
So I just have it's a question and a statement too. So the state of Wisconsin currently right now has a sizable surplus, and I don't remember the exact numbers. I'm sure somebody over there does. Probably Andy.
3.8 billion.
Right, 3.8 million
Billion.
surplus, or billion, sorry, surplus. And they chose not to give any additional to the schools. As a community member, not as a member of the board, what is there that a community member could do to maybe petition our legislature to take care of some of our schools and do that?
That sounds enough like a legal question that I'm going to refer to Gina.
So I would say that twofold, that as a non-employee, that you certainly have a right to advocate to your legislators about what action you would like them to take. Okay. And so I think it's helpful as people who know about education to also give them information to understand the impact that it is having on our kids in terms of that. And we talk about this at every board meeting about the needs of our children just increasing and not having the funds to be able to meet their needs. And so I think that's really good information for them to have, because many of them are not educators and have not been or visited schools. As an employee who may be watching while you're on work time or with district resources, you can't advocate, but you can always give information to an elected official, just like we give you information at board meetings. So I think it's always helpful for legislators to hear from people with expertise or information that is good for them to have, so that they're making informed decisions when they vote. Does that help?
Great, thank you. Any other questions for discussion? Dr. Bergstrom, anything further?
No, just that we look forward to continuing this conversation because it's so important to our students.
Okay, and thank you, Erica, for doing such a great job on that presentation. Information items. Dr. Bergstrom, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm sure with this on, it makes that even more challenging, so thank you for the reminder. And then the board has also established 3 to 5 year draft strategic priorities that will be working through the existing committees of visioning and policy to impact the experience of our students. So there are lots of really important things that are happening in the visioning and strategic planning within that framework. One of the most recent, of course, was our administrative workshop. This is a yearly 2 to 3 day event where we spend a lot of time talking about what's most important, planning, reflecting on the past year, planning forward on the next, and also spending some time just ensuring that we are indeed a collaborative and cohesive team, because we want people, whether it's our families, our students, our staff, we want people to be able to see and feel the alignment within our district, that we really are all in the same boat, pulling the oars together in the same direction. And that takes a lot of time and attention to make sure that that happens. An administrative workshop is one example of that. Now related to our teaching and learning update, this is where I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Tanner to talk a little bit about the role of assessment. Got it.
Now is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. So this is just totally informational about the strategic assessment system that we use in Oregon, and it is based on the DPI model. So earlier in the year, John and I had the opportunity to talk to you guys about advanced learning. We talk about academics with respect to the diamond graphic, and we spoke about mental health, and so we wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about assessment too. So this first slide comes right from DPI, and it just talks about the 3 different types of assessment that we use. So getting people familiar with the language and explicitly defining what they are is super important so that we can all stay on the same page. So the 3 types of assessment are formative, interim, and summative. And then this graphic works down to create a sentence for each one of the assessment types. So there's a lot of text on this page, so I'll kind of show you how it works, starting with formative, that bright blue. You would read it, formative assessments are designed to quickly inform instruction by providing specific, actionable, immediate feedback through teacher techniques embedded into daily, ongoing instructional strategies that are student classroom centered and that answer academic, social, emotional questions like what comes next for student learning, what adjustments should be made to the instructional program. So when you move on to interim assessments, they are talking about those benchmark and monitoring assessments, and summative assessments are the evaluative. Those are things like grades on a report card or the forward exam. So the next slide is just meant to show you like what those look like in an Oregon school district classroom. So what might a formative assessment be? It could be anything from student conferences and exit slips to just questioning in the classroom, teachers taking anecdotal notes, doing a quick check for understanding by asking students to indicate thumbs up or thumbs down for understanding, because that quickly assesses the students and allows the teacher to know what needs to be done next. Interim assessments are assessments that are those benchmarking assessments that we use, like the STAR test that we use in the spring, or let me start over, in the fall, in the winter, in the spring. And then summative assessments are things like chapter tests, projects that are like sort of culminating projects, classroom grades, graduation and discipline rates, and statewide assessments like the forward exam and the ACT. And that is all I have.
All right, does any board member have any questions for Darcy? Go ahead, Anna.
I do have a question. Are we, I guess, are some teachers using also a pre-assessment as far as understanding what kids know prior to introducing the subject so that they know what variety of understanding they may have within the classroom? So is that something, it seems like what we learned about this evening is maybe more, like you said, state, DPI focused, but are there I guess, so one question is, are we doing also some pre-assessment work? And then secondly, are there other interim assessments that are being done within classrooms that maybe don't rely on those standardized testing? Just curious if there are other examples of those types of assessments that are happening within the classroom.
So, okay, so for pre-assessment, I would say absolutely, it's a best practice, and those would probably be considered in the formative category because those are the ones that are really guiding the teacher instruction. So for the interim assessment, I think teachers may use interim assessments, things that might benchmark students, things like the Fontes and Pinnell to get like reading, like what their reading levels are or the Rigby. But consistently, we use the literally also, but like consistently across the board and expectation, I'm struggling to come up with a benchmarking assessment that we use in classrooms across the board.
Any other questions on it? No. Okay. Go ahead, Mary.
Can you explain or describe a little bit about how the STAR test is used as an interim?
Yeah, so the students take the test, students in 112, is it all the way to 12, John? For math and ELA, okay. So they take the test 3 times a year. So in the spring, we do our data meetings and we take a look at students who, when we take a look at the data from a school-wide perspective, we're taking a look at how our students are doing with respect to like the 42nd percentile. And as the year moves on, we take it again in the winter. It's basically a 34-question assessment in ELA and math. And they take it again, and then we're watching for growth at those times. And so we watch that the students grow at least by a year by the end of the school year.
And then do teachers have the ability to differentiate based on those STAR tests, or is it's really looking at 1 year's worth of?
No, there absolutely is a lot of information that's given in the data of the STAR test that teachers could use if they chose to use it with respect to that information. One of the things with the STAR test, though, is when it gives a scale score, it's often extrapolated based on the data that the students answered. So sometimes it might say that a student is not proficient, say, in statistics and probability, but the reason is because they extrapolate that data based on their score, their correct answers on other questions, and they may have never even seen a statistics question.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Darcy.
Thank you.
Appreciate the information.
All right, are we ready for Superintendent's Report? Despite the fact that it is summer, there is still a lot to highlight. There is no rest around the Oregon School District. And one of the first things is we want to welcome our new Transportation and Safety Director. Our new director is a gentleman named Larry Mayo. He was most recently a transportation director or manager at Badger Bus. He's also been a police corporal communications supervisor with Capitol Police. He is highly qualified for this job and very excited to get started. And he's also a parent in the district, which is always a really nice plus. So we'll be welcoming him on July 1st. We also had Every Teacher a Leader Summit, the beginning part of July. And these are groups of educators who work as a team on something that they want to initiate within our school district. They come up with projects, and they are supported through the program Every Teacher Leader. They all come together to do their planning and their brainstorming. They are provided with an outside critical friend, somebody who's not a part of the group, to come in and listen and ask questions and push thinking forward. And then they are able to meet multiple times over the course of the year to bring their project to fruition. So it's really important because it allows teachers an opportunity to be innovative and to try something that puts them out in, well, that's innovation. Try something that puts them out in front related to a project, an idea, something that they know would be good for kids. We also have a lot of summer professional development, and while this might not look like it's summer professional development, that's actually an example of our high school counselors. They're at a convening called The Power of Human Connection. That was something set forward for student services teams throughout the state. They do great work, and we really appreciate them. We also know that we have the OSD summer meal options, and we've spoken about this before, but it's really worthy of more discussion. It came out in an email before the end of the school year to families to help them know that we do have meals free of charge at Netherwood and Prairie View in that area, outside or inside. They would be assigned directing people. Our wonderful food pantry is providing free meals for anyone, just like the OSD meals are for anyone, in Brooklyn and Fitchburg at specific locations. And then anyone who is at the high school for summer school, because that starts next week. If they're eligible, they could receive free or reduced meals at the high school, or they could also have the option to purchase. Now, here's an interesting little update. Just a couple of hours ago, we received a notice that there's a possibility that free summer meals will be extended due to a bill passed by Congress today. So we'll be updating our families if that indeed does happen, but that could be really exciting. Speaking of exciting, this is the second time one of our soccer teams became a state champion this year. First our boys and then our girls, and you can tell by the looks on their faces that this brought a lot of joy to the girls and honestly to their families. I think there were as many tearful, joyous people in the stands as there were on the field. So it was a really wonderful thing to watch happen. They put in so much time, so much work, and to see it all pay off to that degree, boy, that must feel great for them. It surely made the rest of us very proud to watch it. We had over 200 OSD students participating in the Wisconsin School Music Association Solo and Ensemble Festival. So we always have such active musicians, but then when they're doing it in the summer too, that is so wonderful for the students, and so many thanks for the educators who are supporting them. Solo and Ensemble offers students the opportunity to learn the discipline of rehearsal, challenges them to advance their musical skills, allows them to perform in front of an audience, and offers students feedback on their performance. In addition, the following students were recognized with an Exemplary Performance Award. Lorenz Fradkin-Annan did a violin solo. Aaron Dieter did a marimba solo. Alex Seitler did a marimba solo. And the Catching Shadows Percussion Ensemble, Aaron Dieter, Josh Dieter, Max Higgins, Adam Mickelson, Michael Modaff, and Alex Seitler, they all were part of the Exemplary Performance Awards too. So congratulations to our musicians. Kate Davis, she is the 2022 Wisconsin FFA State Prepared Leadership Development Event winner. So she is in the leadership development category and is a state champion. Congratulations to Kate. And to Jonathan Krieger. Jonathan Krieger is the second place at Nationals in Skills USA. He traveled all the way to Atlanta with his teacher. You can see Mr. Hawkinson there, to participate in the National Skills USA competition, and to earn second in the nation is pretty amazing. Then we also had the Oregon Pool. Look at those log rolling kids. So there's so much going on at the pool, from the swimming fundamentals to advanced log rolling. The pool really has it all. So many thanks to our swim instructors and lifeguards. They're keeping a lot of kids moving in a positive direction this summer. And that's it.
All right, great. I always love that report. It's so fun to see the breadth and depth of all the things that are going on in the district. Okay, moving on to F, closing, future agenda. I think we talked about what's happening in the first meeting in July. We may have some things from committees. We do have some financial work to maybe look at for the board in terms of a directive, and then we do also have some standard things that occur every year at this time. So we will get that agenda out in advance of that meeting. All right, moving on to checkout. I will go around the horn and see if anyone has anything for checkout. We'll start with you, Mary.
I don't think I have anything tonight. Thank you.
Heather. Troy. Leslie. Anna. All right. We will take about a 5-minute, 7:30, we'll have a closed session. Thanks, everyone.